what feels unrealistic with humans is possible with God. I really believe that following Jesus is the way to a spacious life. And I would want my readers to take his promises serious, that if you build your life on him and his teachings, there's a strong foundation that awaits you. There's a spaciousness to your soul that awaits you. There is a quality of life and connection with God that's available to you. But it's not going to come easy. But I think anything that we've done in our lives that has been of meaning hasn't come easy. It's been something that we've actually had to wrestle with. But in that wrestling, we get to that place, and it's so much more meaningful than something that didn't cost us anything.
Hello, and welcome to the Shifting Culture podcast, in which we have conversations about the culture we create and the impact we can make. We long to see the body of Christ look like Jesus. I'm your host, Joshua Johnson. Our show is powered by you, the listener. If you want to support the work that we do, get early access to episodes, episode guides, and more, go to patreon.com/shiftingculture to become a monthly patron so that we can continue in this important work. And don't forget to hit the follow button on your favorite podcast app to be notified when new episodes come out each week. And go leave a rating and review. It's easy. It only takes a second, and it helps us find new listeners to the show. Just go to the show page on the app that you're using right now and hit 5 stars. It really is that easy. Thank you so much. You know what else would help us out? Share this podcast with your friends, your family, your network. Tell them how much you enjoy it and let them know that they should be listening as well. If you're new here, welcome. If you want to dig deeper, find us on social media at Shifting Culture Podcast, where I post video clips and quotes and interact with all of you. Previous guests on the show have included Terry Christ, Sharon Hottie Miller, and Drew Hyun. You can go back, listen to those amazing episodes and more. But today's guest is Rich Villodas. Rich Villodas is the Brooklyn-born lead pastor of New Life Fellowship, a large multiracial church with more than 75 countries represented in Elmhurst, Queens. Rich graduated with a BA in Pastoral Ministry and Theology from Nyack College. He went on to complete his Master of Divinity from Alliance Theological Seminary. Rich is the author of 3 books, the award-winning The Deeply Formed Life, Good and Beautiful and Kind, and his most recent, The Narrow Path. He and his wife Rosie have 2 beautiful children and reside in Long Island, New York. In this conversation, Rich Villodas and I focus on Jesus' teachings in the Sermon on the Mount and what it means to follow the narrow path. We discuss how the Sermon on the Mount helps navigate cultural diversity, the differences between the narrow path and the broad way of living, Jesus' teachings on topics like the Beatitudes, money, anxiety, and individualism versus communal life. We also talk about issues like peacemaking, witnessing one's faith, cultivating presence, and navigating spiritual forces that draw us away from God's kingdom. Throughout, Rich emphasizes how following Christ's difficult teachings can lead to a spacious life through connection with God. Join us as we learn how to follow the narrow path. Here is my conversation with Rich Villodas. Rich, welcome to Shifting Culture. Excited to have you on. Thank you so much for joining me.
Hey, Joshua, thanks so much for the kind invitation. Look forward to a good conversation with you.
Yeah, it's going to be a great conversation. I know it already. We're going to talk a bit about your new book, The Narrow Path, the Sermon on the Mount. And so as an introduction to you, for listeners, how has the Sermon on the Mount helped you navigate like your cultural diversity of your church, the diversity of perspective and cultures? How's the Sermon on the Mount helped in that situation? Where are you and what are you doing?
Yeah, the Sermon on the Mount, I regard it as the most important set of teachings as it relates to being faithful to Jesus. It's the manifesto of the kingdom of God. And as I think about my own context, in many respects, the Sermon on the Mount universalizes the human experience, the human story. I pastor a church where there are folks from over 75 nations represented, incredible diversity on all fronts, racially, culturally, generationally, socioeconomically. And so the Sermon on the Mount has a way of really getting to the heart of every single human being, no matter where in this world they're coming from. And I think that's, in many ways, how the Sermon on the Mount has challenged and comforted me. And in the same respect, I think challenged and comforted our congregation. It's, when you start, when you pray the Lord's Prayer, when you address anger, when you address desires and lust, when you address matters of our words, yes being yes and no being no, Jesus is really getting at every human being throughout every generation. And I think that's how it's impacted my life and the way I pastor our church.
In the midst of different ideologies within your own congregation and people, especially in the city that you live in, different political views, different views on everything. How do you navigate something where it doesn't devolve into culture wars, but it talks about, hey, this is what Jesus is saying about our culture here and now, and not just back then? It actually has something to say about what we're going through now.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's still happening in my church, Josh. So I don't want to.
Yeah, I know.
I don't want to come up here and say, listen, you want heaven on earth? Come to Queens. Or no sin, no problems, no struggles. We're doing just fine. I think that temptation is in every community, and ours is no different. When I think the challenge of our day is that Christianity very easily can be weaponized in such a way. That's where the culture warring often emerges, that we want Christianity and the tenets of our faith to be represented in every public space. I mean, there's a conversation going on right now about the Ten Commandments in Louisiana. And so I think that the danger is when Christianity as a symbol, when Christianity as an ideology, when Christianity as even a set of teachings becomes the thing that we want to now wield against the world. I mean, that's when the culture warring takes place, where it's not emerging from a deep life communion with God in Christ, which cultivates humility and love and compassion and mercy. And so I think the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus refuses to let us off the hook in the Sermon on the Mount. He confronts or names the ways that, especially in that culture, and the ways that sensibility tends to be reflected in every generation. It's very easy to address the law. For you've heard it said, but I've said unto you. It's very easy to address particular tenets of faith from a very superficial perspective, and Jesus is saying, I'm not going to let you do that. We're going to get to the intended meaning of what all of this is pointing to. And so, I mean, pastoring throughout these divisions in our society, the fragmentation of our world, I think the Sermon on the Mount, again, universalizes the human experience as well as gets beneath the surface, where I think the cultural warring often does not, because it stays at the level of symbol and ideology.
Right. So if you're talking to people right now about the narrow path, when I hear narrow path, I hear constriction, limitations. I can't do, what I want to do. I can't do me, right? And then opposite, the broad path feels like open and spacious, and like there's the lure of the good life in the broad path. The broad way is pretty strong. Why do you think that this narrow path actually leads to a spacious life when this broad path actually leads to more constriction in our own life and like turning inside of ourselves?
Yeah, the way I contrast the narrow kind of path and the broad way is really through, on one side, the teachings of Jesus and the kingdom of God. And on the other side, the larger kind of worldly ways of thinking about what makes for a good life. And I think Jesus comes on the scene and does not mince words, letting us know that if you really want a good life, it's going to look very different from the prevailing notions of what success and what value looks like in our world. And so when Jesus comes, he comes, his teachings are a means of confronting the worldly system, that's dominated by money, that's dominated by power, that's dominated by the kind of influence for the sake of being over and against others. And so the narrow path, I mean, I put narrow for a particular reason, because at the end of the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus says, enter the narrow gate. The narrow road is what leads to life. And that's usually interpreted as the number of people that are going to end up in heaven is really narrow, and the number of people that's going to be someplace else is very broad. And I think what Jesus is more saying there is that the way of the kingdom of God is narrow. That is, it can seem very constricting, and in many ways, it's constricting to our false selves. It's constricting to the ways that the world defines success. But as we get inside of it, there's a spaciousness. You know, Joshua, I opened the book by talking about Harry Potter as a metaphor to one of my, I've listened, I've read, I've watched the movies and all that stuff there. So depending on who you talk to, that's a very offensive thing to say these days on every side of the spectrum there to give shout out to Harry Potter. But there's this image in the Goblet of Fire where Harry's with this, the Weasley family, and they're about to go into this small tent that looks like a backyard tent, but it's been charmed so that when you go through this narrow entryway on the inside, it's like this apartment. It's very large on the inside. And I think the grace of God, the language I'm using is has charmed really what the kingdom of God is. On the outside, it looks narrow, constricting, and it is narrow and constricting for the ways that the world is ordered by. But when you get in, I think there's a spaciousness to our soul that Jesus is really hoping that we really say yes to. So it is narrow. That's the truth. I'm not denying that. Hey, don't worry about it. It can feel constricting, but there is life that God has for us.
Yeah, there's a lot of life in it.
Yeah.
So if you look at the culture around us, you talk about the broad way, and you talk about moralism, successism, and individualism broadly of what our culture views as the good life. So what is that? What is the predominant cultural worldview at the moment?
Hi, this is Ashley T. Lee Podcast. Join me to hear the Bible read line by line and clearly explained. Listen to the Word of God in your car or home or work while it transforms your mind daily. Romans 12:2 says, "Don't be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you may prove what the will of God is, which is good and acceptable and perfect." Knowing the Bible can give you peace and joy in this hectic world. Listen weekly to Ashley T. Lee Podcast on all podcast sites.
Well, around those, what I'm doing there with the Sermon on the Mount is I'm trying to take a 30,000 foot perspective as to what are the areas that Jesus is critiquing and then inviting us into. And so for me, I do regard that as a kind of, first of all, of a moralism. And by that, I mean, I know moralism has been used in many different ways. The way I'm looking at it is that there can be such a fixation on the externals without examination of the interior. And Jesus, on a number of occasions in the Sermon on the Mount, is naming this human problem, but especially a religious problem. But I think it expands to the world around us, that we can be so focused on the superficial stuff of life. And Jesus says, I refuse to have you live there. There's a deeper world within you that I'm calling you to tend to. And I think so much of the world is oriented around avoidance of self. It's very fascinating. I mean, we can talk about all we want about, the mental health crisis in our world, which is very real. Not a lot of people are actually taking a journey inward. And I think Jesus is hoping that our lives would have an element of examination to them. I also talk about, the individualism. And by that, it's very easy, and it sounds so cliche. So when I was writing it, I was just like, this sounds so on the nose and so cliche. This doesn't sound original whatsoever, and it's not. That we can very easily separate love of God from love of neighbor, and because of course we can, but it happens so insidiously, that next thing you know, we're talking about God, and then we're avoiding matters of justice, we're avoiding matters of compassion, we're avoiding matters of people who are in deep need. And so that individualism tends to show up on a regular basis as well. And so whether we're talking about moralism, whether we're talking about successism, successism is the other language, the other term I use of what the good life is marked by. And in a fascinating way, when Jesus begins the Sermon on the Mount, he begins with blessings, beatitudes, reminding us that the way that we think about what a good life is looks pretty different to Jesus. And so it's a very challenging way of thinking about what a good life is, what success is, and to what degree am I pursuing that as opposed to pursuing what Jesus is inviting me into and following him in the kingdom of God.
So how should we view and see the Beatitudes if he's talking about the good life? And is it just a list of things that we have to do and strive in our own effort? Is it something that Jesus is blessing us with? What are the Beatitudes for us?
I do think there's two ways of thinking about it. I think one is Jesus is in many ways turning things upside down and letting us know that who the world regards as unfortunate, God often regards as blessed. And so those who mourn, those who are poor in spirit, those who are meek, those are not categories that the world regards as like a good life, a life to be emulated. It's like, no, I want to get away from poverty. I want to get away from mourning. I want to be happy. I don't want meekness sounds like being passive. I want to take the bull by the horn here. And I think so in one respect, I respect Jesus is flipping it to let us know the ways we think about who God blesses there's an entirely different category, the way that God sees it. But secondly, I do see it as a road to journey on, that what does it look like for us to make space for mourning and lament? You know, so much of our spirituality, so much of our world around us is cheapened because of our inability to name our grief before God. Jesus calls the peacemakers those who are blessed. It's very easy to live very passively and not wanting to rock the boat. And Jesus is saying, no. The people who are truly blessed are the people who refuse to say yes to a false peace. And so in one way, it's a categorically different way of seeing the world, but also I see it as in the context of like ethics as well. God calls us to journey on a different road together.
Yeah. I was listening the other day. I really like Elvis Costello's song, What's So Funny About Peace, Love, and Understanding. Yeah. And I was listening to that song, and my wife was like, why in the world do people get so caught up? Like, why don't we have peace or love or understanding? Like, it's easy, isn't it? And I was like, no, that way is hard. It's difficult. So if you just contrasted peacekeeping, which seems easy, right? You're keeping peace, to peacemaking.
Yeah.
That's a costly thing. How much does it cost us to be peacemakers in this world?
Goodness. It costs, you know what? Here, it costs our lives. I mean, if you read the Ten Commandments, if you read the Sermon on the Mount and the Beatitudes, Jesus goes right into peacemakers. And then he soon after starts talking about blessed are those who are persecuted. And so I think, make no mistake about it, to name the ways that sin takes root in our world, individually, interpersonally, and especially institutionally. To name those areas is a invitation for pain, for misunderstanding, for being potentially marginalized, and for various reasons, because lots of people see the world very differently, and how one person understands what a good world looks like might differ from someone else. And so we're fraught with all kinds of complexity here. But make no mistake about it, to be a peacekeeper or a peacemaker rather, is to go down the road of pain, which is why, again, it's narrow. And not many people choose that, including Christians. And so there's a cost, most certainly.
If I could jump into moralism and how the Sermon on the Mount really helps us deal with the moralism that you're talking about. Even just take right now the Ten Commandments in Louisiana.
Yeah.
And so what's the difference? This outward look, like forcing, like these are the moral tenets that we just need to abide by, into looking inward of what Jesus is calling us to, like what is the actual heart motivation behind what we're doing. And I mean, Jesus, in every single one of the things he's talking about, he takes it further than the outward expression.
Yeah.
Things,
well,
right?
well, I would just say I'm usually very skeptical in many contexts where Christianity is used in a way to further centralize its presence in our culture. In many respects, this sounds very Constantinian to me. It sounds very, let's make sure that the world becomes Christian again. And in many respects, there's a difference between Jesus Christ ruling and reigning and his followers seeking to create a kind of Christian culture that drowns the voices out of everyone else. And so I often wonder, is it a Christian thing to subject people to some tenets, some values, some belief systems that are now not marked by invitation, but by coercion, not marked by invitation, but by institutionalizing something? And I think that the challenge is when Mark Toulouse wrote a book called God in Public, and he wrote about something called iconic faith. And iconic faith is when religious language is leveraged for political purposes. And I think that's where we're really getting into trouble, because when religious language is used for political purposes, we are doing, in many respects, everything Jesus says he's not calling us to do in the Sermon on the Mount. And so you have heard it said, but I say unto you, you have heard it said that the 10 Commandments are good. And this is my riff on it here, but I tell you that if you're not living the commandments, what difference does it make if it's put publicly anyway? It now becomes a symbol. And then here's the challenge: the symbol in the human hearts of people who are oriented by a particular vision then leads to exclusion, hypocrisy, duplicity. I mean, everything that I guess ends with the letter Y we're going to now lead into some significant troubles here, because it's no longer about really living a different life. It's about now, how can we utilize and in many ways weaponize the symbols of our faith to get everyone else to bow? And I think that's in many respects inconsistent with Jesus.
Yeah. So he talks about being a witness in the Sermon on the Mount. So then how should we live in the world as a witness? What is the call of Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount to live in the world?
You know, what I love about that witness piece is, first of all, he's talking to people who have not done anything yet, and he calls them salt and light. I think about that on a regular basis. He's like, you're the salt of the world, you're the light of the world. I mean, these guys have not healed anyone. They haven't preached yet. They haven't been sent out by Jesus. I just love that. But, you know, to be salt in the world and light, I think in many ways, Jesus is starting there, and then he's letting us know throughout the rest of the Sermon on the Mount what salt and light looks like. You know what salt and light looks like? Salt and light looks like that we don't carry rage and antagonisms towards others. Salt and light looks like fidelity to someone and not being driven by our lustful appetites. Salt and light looks like that we're true to our word, that we say yes when we mean yes and we say no when we mean no. Salt and light looks like a life marked by prayer. Specifically in that context, Jesus says that we are to show forth our good deeds so that the Father is glorified. So I think in many ways, salt and light looks like us being intentionally outward focused, seeking to love our neighbors in the everydayness of life and in the very big realities of life as well. And that's going to look different from person to person, but I do think it is this kind of outward, generous, kind, compassionate, loving presence that the Sermon on the Mount describes throughout the rest of, the 2 to 3 chapters.
I was just thinking about the call to love our neighbors. A lot of people go, I'm going to love with certain conditions. I'm going to love, like, if they're lovable, I will love them. Like it is a conditional type of love.
Yes.
And man, so that's a hard balance because, God calls us to something. He calls us to the narrow path and like life in the kingdom. And, it's hard, but not everybody's on that journey right now. Not everybody's on that path.
Yeah.
So when people are on the broad path, the broad way, as you say, and they said, I have been invited to this, but I don't want it yet. What does it look like to love our neighbor when there are differences and they may not even want to be invited to the way of Jesus right now? How do we love people without our agendas?
Yeah. So much of what Jesus models for us in the New Testament is oriented around invitation, not imposition. And, if anyone would follow me, that's Matthew chapter 16. There's tons of invitation. And I think for those of us who have family members, for those of us who have neighbors, for those of us who have friends that are not really interested in following Jesus, I think the best option we have is, number one, to live a life that's so anchored in Jesus that the fruit of the Spirit is emerging from our lives, that there's something qualitatively different about the way we live in the world. And especially, I think what makes Christians distinct, Joshua, I think more than anything, is not just the teachings, but the capacity we have through the Holy Spirit, and God help us in this, to love people that are very difficult to love our enemies. I think that is, in many ways, what distinguishes, because there are a lot of people who are not following Jesus. They're just good people. They're kinder. I know plenty of people who are not Christians that are kinder than Christians, more generous than Christians, more honest than Christians. You know what I mean? So Christians don't have a monopoly on morality. Let's just say that. I would also say, though, that what Christians do have is the presence of the Holy Spirit that gives us the ability to love our enemies and love those who might not see the world in the way that we do. And I think that is probably our best witness. Moreover, I do think the constant invitation, I've posted in some place that Christians are no good at making friends because friendship is not the goal. It's usually like transactional. And I do think, what would it look like for us to trust God with the life of someone in this age and the age to come, and at the same time seek to befriend them in a way where friendship is the end? And that doesn't mean I'm not looking for opportunities to preach good news and find spaces where, Jesus has something to say about that. But I think imitation and imitation of Christ and invitation, I think, are really what should mark the posture of our hearts, especially as we're in conversation with people who don't want to follow the Jesus way.
I think one of the more difficult things, especially when it comes to our culture, the culture of the world works and revolves around money. And money is, something that we're attaining to. We want to survive, to live, to do some things. And then sometimes we just get caught up in I just need more money. And that's the thing that's driving me. And Jesus, one of the things he talks about more than anything else is money.
Yeah.
What is the kingdom life that revolves around money? How do we navigate our money issues?
Well, this is fresh on my mind because we're going through a 4-week series at this time of this recording in our church on money. And I think the way we navigate it first and foremost is to correctly categorize money. It's very interesting to look at that passage in Timothy. It says the love of money is the root of all evil. And I think that passage, it's scripture, of course, is there, but I think it tells just one side of the story. I don't think it tells the full picture, because the way Jesus talks about money in the Sermon on the Mount is he does not talk about it as money being a neutral tool, but as a rival god, a rival master. And so much so where this is the only place. I mean, I'm happy to continue to jog my memory, but in the scriptures where Jesus says something like, "You can't serve two blank, you can't serve two masters," and the only context that he names that in is regarding to mammon, to money. And so there's something about money that Jesus says this is not some neutral tool. In some ways, it's like the ring in Lord of the Rings. I think about Gandalf. One of the scenes in the Lord of the Rings that just I think is the Fellowship of the Ring, where he's in Bilbo's house or is whatever you call those things there, and the ring is calling out to him. Gandalf is like this holy, man of God, and he's like it's beckoning him. And I think there is something within our hearts, and then I think there's a power outside of ourselves. And I think Jesus is trying to help us see, be careful around this thing. Be mindful. It will seek to swallow you and absorb you into its orbit. And so I think, number one, that is the first place to begin around that. And then in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus goes from money to anxiety very seamlessly. And I think beyond it just being a rival God, I think then he's trying to, in the Sermon on the Mount, help us see the Father for who the Father really is, as one who is generous and can take care of us. And so the invitation to dealing with money is not simply watch out. It's also, do you have a recollection of who God is? Do you have an image of God in your mind that's actually entrenching you deeper into the pull of money?
I think that's really helpful. I could see just in so many different ways that money just pulls us into a life full of anxiety. If we let that rule us, it is a life full of anxiety. There's also a lot of other anxieties, and we're an anxious people at the moment. We have more knowledge and understanding about trauma, about depression, mental health issues than ever before, and we talk about it. Even then, we struggle with it the most. Is there a way to be attentive to what we're going through, but then also walk through it, maybe give it back to God? How do we not just stay in the attention of it, but then move through the attention to the other side of it?
Yeah, addressing anxiety. I mean, one of the frameworks that has been really helpful to me, I learned this while in seminary. It was developed by a professor named Craig Ellison, who's passed away. And I believe it was developed by him, or maybe he popularized it for me. But it was like this biopsychosocial spiritual framework of addressing mental health, addressing anxiety. And I think it is the integration of those four different arenas that really helps us move into wholeness. I think that what often happens is there is on one side of the spectrum from kind of maybe a non-religious secular perspective, an emphasis on the bio, the psycho, the social. And then on one side of the Christian experience is often really the spiritual. And the other stuff is, if you can get around to it, that's fine. And I do think addressing anxiety, addressing any aspect of mental health for that matter, requires all four of those things to work together. So, our biology, the way we are being socialized, our own, interiority, our own mental health, but also our spiritual lives. And what Jesus does in the Sermon on the Mount is he begins to address anxiety by going to the spiritual first. Now, of course, I think we need everything we can get our hands on to help us move towards wholeness. What I think happens though, Joshua, and I'm curious what you think about this. It seems in many respects that there has been a pendulum swing where we can be very close to emphasizing the bio, the psycho, the social. And then the spiritual thing is like kind of over here. What Jesus does is he begins with like, your view of God will either contribute to your anxiety or help you begin to minimize it. And I think that's an area where we often don't go. I'm curious, what do you think about that? I'm curious, like, do you see pendulum swinging there? I know you're interviewing me, but I'm just curious.
I see pendulum swings everywhere. Like that, we don't know how to get to center. Like we're like, all we're doing is reacting to something and going the totally opposite direction. And we actually just need smaller course corrections in our life, in our churches, and what we're doing. And so pendulum swings really are not helpful because we're going to have to course correct back. I mean, I think we're even in the same thing. I'm just going to take it into the church. I don't think we've finished the Reformation. I don't think we're good at the priesthood of all believers. We still have, solo heroic leaders at the top that are, and everybody else are consumers, right? This consumeristic type of mindset of walking in our faith. But even when it comes to mental health, I think the pendulum swing is, we haven't been aware of what was going on in those spaces. And so we've had to actually probably go a little bit further into the space of, our biology, our social construct of how that has helped us and shaped us, so that then we can then be more attentive to what God is doing for us. But I think you're right in the place of our view of who God is going to help us live into a new reality. The way that we know how to change our minds, that metanoia process, to have our paradigm shifts, our mind blown, is so crucial and important, especially when it comes to our identity with God.
Yeah, I'm with you 100% on that. That's really well said. What was the language you just used? I like that. It was lessening the swings.
Yes. I think it's more of course correction than a pendulum shift.
I like that. No, yeah. I like that. Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, we definitely need that. Thinking, I want to go into just for fun, because I'm a basketball guy. I coach basketball. I coached college basketball for a while. And so I know you're a basketball guy. You like to play basketball a lot. How has that informed your view of the difference between individualism and the communal life with God? I think a good quality basketball team knows how to work together. And if people are more about themselves and about the stats that they can get, the team starts to fall apart and disintegrates. How has basketball shaped your view of individualism and the communal life?
Yeah, I think sports in general has done that for me. Growing up, my father had me in all kinds of sports. And so I was maybe 7 when I first joined my first Little League team, baseball. And the sad thing is I was not good at baseball. And it took a while before I got good at basketball. But I played a lot for sure. This is fresh in my mind also because I led a men's retreat as the time of this recording last weekend with about 75 of our men, and a number of us played basketball together. I just found it very interesting. We were talking very deeply before that basketball session around support, around encouragement, around belonging to something bigger than ourselves. And then we got on the court. Elbows were thrown for sure, and very competitive. But I think what we did find, especially with the teams, was embodying that, literally embodying in our voices, in our embraces, in our high fives and all that. We need you. You're doing great. Encouragement, and I think so much of, because my life has been oriented around sports since I was 7, so much of the team emphasis, the encouragement, the support, I do see that as a really helpful, analogy to think about the spiritual life as well, that we are part of this team that Jesus has called us to. But boy, we need one another. And And so I think it's in some ways. In other ways, I'll tell you this though, Joshua, because I've been a New York Mets fan, a Jets fan, and a Knicks fan. The Knicks are doing really well right now, but what I've learned about God is suffering. That's what I've learned about this. The cross. That's what I really learned.
That's true. Well, I grew up in Seattle. It's pretty similar. Seattle sports teams. I mean, we've had a couple of championships, Sonics, but they moved away. Suffering.
Yeah.
I don't know who to root for in the NBA anymore. Sonics moved away. We got, the Mariners have never been to the World Series. Like it's rough out there, but it's all right. We could suffer through it.
Yeah.
It's okay.
You're learning about Jesus for sure.
Yeah, I'm in Kansas City now, so I got the Chiefs.
So, you're doing all right. You're doing just fine now.
We're doing just fine. We're great. One of the things you've said over and over again in this conversation, especially in the Sermon on the Mount, is one, it's attention into our interior life of looking to say we need to give attention to some different things, and then move into we need to actually be attentive to God. So, what is the attentive life? How do we become people of attention?
Well, I think one, it begins with a recognition that the world that we're in is continuously pulling us into an orbit of distraction. Sociologists say we live in this constant state of partial attention, where our full selves are not in a particular place at any given time. It could be geographically, proximate to someone, and be somewhere else. I think that's the nature. I think the nature of technology, especially something like social media, is it deceives us into thinking that we can live with the three main attributes of God. That classic attributes of God of being omnipresent, omniscient, and omnipotent. That we can be omnipresent everywhere at the same time, but not really present in one place. And so I think it begins there. Like your soul is consistently being pulled to be not here. I think what has helped me along those lines, though, is contemplative prayer. I think contemplative prayer, and I do it very imperfectly. I've been doing contemplative prayer for the last, 20 years. And to have a space where I'm setting my timer for 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, and just saying, Lord, here am I, or here I am. What neurologists and neuroscientists are discovering is that there is something about silence and contemplative prayer and meditation that is rewiring our brains a bit and helping us, not just with our kind of emotional health, but enabling us to be more present. And so the way I've thought about presence is more so around being with God, but being with God for the sake of being with others. I'll often pray after my time in silence. It's like, Lord, may I love you and be present to you with my heart, soul, mind, and strength. And may I love and be present to my neighbor, beginning with my first neighbors, that is my wife and my kids, and starting there. And yet I think there's a power and principality called technology that seeks to absorb us into its orbit. And but those are just, I think contemplative prayers has been my go-to approach to trying to cultivate a greater sense of presence in the world.
What do you say about powers and principalities and the draw into what the powers and principalities have for us, and seeking that instead of seeking, the narrow path? Yeah.
Well, in my second book, Good and Beautiful and Kind, I wrote an entire chapter on powers and principalities. And, out of Ephesians 6, Paul says we don't wrestle against flesh and blood, but against powers, principalities. The way that I try to think about principalities is that principalities are these nefarious forces that get connected to individuals, ideologies, and institutions with a threefold purpose. And that threefold purpose is deception, depersonalization, and division. The evil one, Satan is known as the father of lies. The powers and principalities do the bidding of the evil one. And so deception is there, depersonalization. And I think social media, for example, the reason why you ever noticed people wouldn't say 95% of the stuff they say on social media to someone if they were in the same room. And I think there's something about technology, social media, that depersonalizes people. And we just see an avatar. We don't see their story. We don't see their family. We don't see their history. This is why people are able to, nations are able to bomb other countries with impunity, because we don't really see them over there. And so we don't know them. So they're depersonalized. They're just things. And then division. And so I think the narrow path, Jesus is not addressing per se powers and principalities within those 3 chapters, but throughout, Jesus is consistently confronting the power of the evil one. And the powers and principalities would seek to have us live anger, lust, ways that are inconsistent with the kingdom of God.
I think it's pretty easy for us to rationalize the Sermon on the Mount as just, steps to take and things to do without realizing like the forces, the powers, the principalities are actually drawing us away from that.
Yes.
And I think a lot of especially Western Christians, forget about the spiritual world. They think about heaven, they think about, earth, and what they could see and observe. But the actual spiritual world is almost non-existent for them. But knowing that there is this pull within powers and principalities, how does that help us navigate how we could start to enter into the narrow path?
Well, I do think, in Ephesians 6, Paul lets us know right there. It's almost like your true enemy is not the person who's flesh and blood before you. That there's something else that's animating the animosity, the animus, the antagonisms. So I think number one, it starts with a recognition that the people that are flesh and blood are beloved of God and are called to be treated with dignity. I think that is in many respects how the Beatitudes begin as well. Those who are poor in spirit, those who are mourn, these are the people who God highly esteems. And will one day, those are the folks who are going to inherit the kingdom of God. And so I think it begins with at a baseline, knowing that the person we see is not truly the enemy we should be concerned about. There's something beyond that. Now, I don't want to be naive here and talk about and not clear boundaries. And there are people who are looking to hurt other people. Yeah. But I think from a posture motivation, so very practically, when my wife and I, every month we have a finance meeting where we're talking about money and our plans and whose birthday is this month and who we have to buy a gift for. And, oh no, we got to pay for this here. And why is the electric bill so high? I mean, we go through once a month a meeting, and there have been times when within 3 minutes of the conversation, we're going at it with each other. Yeah. And there have been times where we have to step back and say, honey, you're not the enemy. Satan would love to sow discord in this moment as we're talking about a rival god, money, not just a neutral tool, but a rival god. And so I think having even that this is why C.S. Lewis and the Screwtape Letters has been so important for many generations of Christians, because he is in very everyday ways saying, there are some forces out there that are seeking to pull you away from the kingdom of God and the way of Jesus. Yeah. And having that awareness, I think, is just really important to keep us on that narrow path.
At the end of the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus ends it with the parable of the wise and the foolish builder. And he calls us to actually put his words into practice. He says, if you're the one who builds his house on a rock, you're like a wise builder, hears my words and puts them into practice. But if you build your house on the sand, you're like the foolish builder who hears my words and doesn't put them into practice. I mean, that's a pretty big call to pew sitters and people in the church of hearing the words of Jesus and not doing them. Jesus calls them foolish. And I mean, Jesus is calling them fools, not me.
Yeah. Jesus is called.
So then what does obedience look like in that? If it's not just doing it for moralism's sake, what does obedience look like in that?
I think it's obedience is at the core about a desire for communion with Jesus and conformity to his way. I think moralism, what Jesus is addressing, can be so fixated with performance, the outwards, even like when Jesus teaches about prayer. And he says, don't pray like these pagans who pray for show, who pray superstitiously, who pray super religiously. The focus is on the show, is on the performance. I think when someone is really practicing it, it's about, I want a life of communion with Jesus. I want to know him. I want him to know me. And I want to be conformed to the way of his kingdom. And I think when the motivation now is around union with God, and the motivation is around imitating Jesus in the world for the sake of bearing witness to his kingship, his love, his compassion for the world, I think that's how we guard against moralism. And Joshua, I think naming the ways that the human heart can tend to gravitate towards performance, I think it's just really important to just come to terms with. And so in some ways, when I teach about integrity, living with integrity, one of the ways I like to think about it is that integrity is not about living something perfectly, but wrestling with something faithfully. And I think that's what obedience ultimately is. It is my, and many times, feeble attempt to wrestle faithfully with the teachings and the way of Jesus, knowing I'm going to fail, but thank God for the grace of God. I think what Jesus is getting at with those who are building on sand are those who are, there is this intellectual assent, but there's no particular ordering to one's life. It's just, I got it here. And you know who else has it here? I've been focusing on this recently because we're going to be starting a series on the book of James. The demons have good theology too. And they believe, and they have actually better discernment than the disciples in the New Testament. And yet they don't have the life of God. And so I think what Jesus is getting at is more than just intellectual assent. It's about a way of organizing and ordering our lives according to Jesus in the way of his kingdom.
Yeah, that's really good. So then if you can talk to your readers, what hope would you have for your readers of The Narrow Path?
My hope, number one, would be to properly kind of categorize Jesus's teachings as difficult. I think we need to start there and not act as if this is not hard. And so the challenge I have is some folks will go, oh, this is unrealistic. And so I want to say what feels unrealistic with humans is possible with God. I really believe that following Jesus is the way to a spacious life. And I would want my readers to take his promises serious, that if you build your life on him and his teachings, there's a strong foundation that awaits you. There's a spaciousness to your soul that awaits you. There is a quality of life and connection with God that's available to you. But it's not going to come easy. But I think anything that we've done in our lives that has been of meaning hasn't come easy. It's been something that we've actually had to wrestle with. But in that wrestling, we get to that place, and it's so much more meaningful than something that didn't cost us anything.
Good. I have a couple really quick questions. One, if you go back to your 21-year-old self, what advice would you give?
All right, 21, I had just become a Christian. I was 19 when I became a Christian. So 21, I was on, well, I would say calm down. Number one, I was incredibly zealous, Joshua. I mean, so I was like arguing with everyone at that age. Part of it feels like, I don't know if that's just part of the normal growth of someone who's like come into a newfound hope in life in Christ. And I want the good part of that is I wanted others to know Jesus. The shadow side of that is I did it in a way that was very argumentative, coercive, manipulative. And so I would say, calm down. You can trust Jesus in this. And I would probably say, pray far more than you do. I think much of it's funny because much of the advice that, I remember Billy Graham was asked that similar question as well about what he would do differently in his ministry. His response was like, pray a whole lot more. And most of the folks that I've regarded and respected, the vast majority of them have said, I wish I prayed more and just with God. And so I would tell my 21-year-old self, pray more, be with God.
Good. Anything you've been reading or watching lately you could recommend?
Well, I just read Marilyn Robinson's book, Gilead, which is a classic.
It's amazing. Yeah.
So it was a bit slow for me at first, and then it just clicked, and I was like, "Whoa, this is amazing!" And I just picked up her latest book on reading Genesis, which I'm maybe about 75 pages in. She's just remarkable. I watched recently Godzilla -1.
So did I. So good. Amazing.
One of the best films I've watched in a while. It's just, and I'm not like a Godzilla fan, but it's not really about Godzilla. It's about the horrors of nuclear war and the horrors of PTSD and then the beauty of human love and family and connection. So I'd say Godzilla -1 and Marilyn Robinson.
Perfect. That's good. Well, then how can people go out, get The Narrow Path, and where would you like to point people to connect with you?
Wherever your favorite bookseller. I mean, it should be available everywhere mid-July 2024. And if they want to find me on social media, at Rich Villodas on Instagram and Twitter, X, whatever we're calling it now. And that's where I'm usually testing out ideas for sermons and books, and then or tweeting like a crazy person around my sports team. So that's basically where you're going to get.
Perfect. Sounds good. Well, go get The Narrow Path. It's fantastic. Just live in the Sermon on the Mount. It is a wonderful place to be. It's where Jesus has the best sermon ever told right there on the mountain. So read Rich's book. Is fantastic. Rich, this was a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much for giving your time, walking us through the Sermon on the Mount and what a spacious life looks like, what the good life in the kingdom looks like. So thank you for this. It was fantastic.
Yeah. Thank you, Joshua. Really appreciate you having me.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode. If you want to see more episodes like this, go to patreon.com/shiftingculture and become a monthly patron of the show. You can help us produce more episodes so that we can see the body of Christ look more like Jesus. If you become a patron on patreon.com/shiftingculture, you will get early access to episodes. You will get episode guides. You will get bonus shows, hopefully, and more. So go to patreon.com/shiftingculture and become a monthly patron. Also, leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. It really helps us out and helps us find new listeners to the show. And just go and share this podcast with your friends, your family, your network, people that you think would enjoy it as well. Thank you again for listening to the show. I hope you have a great week.